Welcome to Made of Stories, or rather an explanation of a thesis project called Made of Stories. This project investigates various junctures at which design and storytelling intersect, with a view to storytelling as design practice. To tell the story of the project, this presentation is broken up into three distinct fields or acts. Act 1. Nuclear Semiotics. Nuclear Semiotics is the name given to a series of speculative projects commissioned for the US Department of Energy. The first official Nuclear Semiotics report was organized in 1984 by a group calling itself the Human Interference Task Force and included contributions from a range of invited experts. A similar report was commissioned in 1993 that included a fresh raft of contributors. The aim of both of these reports was to identify a means for best describing and to warn about the physical location of buried nuclear waste, tens of thousands, even millions of years into the future. Contributors to these projects were selected from a wide field of expertise, including linguistics, semiotics, architecture, engineering, public policy, non-verbal communication, material science, climatology, and archaeology, to name a few. By the way, this quote is from John Mann's book Alpha Beta, which looks at the installation of the Western alphabet as lingua franca, and there's more on this expression or terminology later. Further reports were commissioned based on the findings of these two original projects, and similar speculative projects on the topic of identifying nuclear waste repositories continue to be produced, often in an unofficial capacity, such as the Universal Warning Sign Yucca Mountain Design Competition, organized by a group calling themselves the Desert Space Foundation in 2003. Amongst experts elected to submit proposals for the 1993 report was architect and academic Michael Brill. Together with Safdar Abidi, Brill conceived of a series of architectural interventions into the landscape that could sit atop a nuclear waste repository. The names of the various interventions may have been dissuasion enough. For example, there was the landscape of thorns, spike field, black hole, forbidding blocks, and menacing earthworks, amongst others. A later project and winning entry in 2003's Desert Space Foundation competition looked at a more organic, although no less interventionalist, approach to altering the landscape atop nuclear waste sites. Aram Kabadijan's Blue Yucca Ridge proposal suggested a breed of yucca plants could be genetically modified to turn an alarming shade of cobalt blue when in proximity to radiation. This alteration will be present within the genetic code of the plant, and therefore alert those in the future to the deliberate intervention and reason for the plant's unusual color. The image shown here is from a derivative project by Stéphane Perrault, based on Aram's earlier proposition. One of the more enduring proposals to date that possibly influenced the Blue Yucca work was not about genetically modified plants, but rather cats. Nicknamed Raycats, or the Raycat Project, the proposition that semiotician Pablo Fabri and author Francois Bestad came up with seems highly dubious on initial reading. But the genetic engineering of a breed of bioluminescent cats wasn't what they were primarily interested in. It was the story or the folklore built up around these cats that they thought would endure and continue to be shared and transmitted over time. This in fact is what has happened since they first published their proposal. Numerous articles, podcasts, and documentaries have been made about the story of the Ray Cats, perpetuating this constructed mythology, all without the need to actually genetically modify any non-humans. So, to summarize Act 1, when language fails. Fabry's Raycat proposal shows how mythologies can be engineered or designed through storytelling. More so, not only have these nuclear semiotics projects sustained and provoked renewed interest in their subject matter over the decades, they have also proliferated, with new, often independently produced projects building on their legacy. Here we find an example of the longevity storytelling imbues research with, and a role for designers in shaping and maintaining lore, just as narrative designers have begun to be credited for within the field of video game development. Act 2. In a panel discussion entitled Pass It On at the Wheeler Centre in Melbourne as part of NAIDOC Week in 2019, a group of academics and cultural producers met to discuss the many concerns to be addressed in facing the preservation of Aboriginal languages. A key issue was the perceived absence of formally documented vocabularies, ready to be archived and shared. In their place, a complexity of forms of language had evolved which were rich and diverse, but, in many cases, also in dire need of preservation. Vicky Cousins is an artist and Indigenous Research Fellow at RMIT University, where she has helped build and publish dictionaries of Aboriginal dialects and images as part of ongoing studies. On finding a starting point for language preservation, she said, "We don't have all of our words, and when we do get our words, how do we talk? My end game is fluent speakers, and that's going to take a long time. In the meantime, words are where we start." One of the obstacles to language preservation she recognizes is people being shamed because they don't know their language. They get scared because they want to speak it properly. Auntie Faye Stewart-Muir is an author and advisor to the National Curriculum on Language and Culture within so-called Australia. She explained that the people that have collected our words, the way they heard it was the way they wrote it down. Our language was oral and we didn't write things down, so there is a forensic audit that we need to go through with each word we find. Brendan Kennedy is a Victorian Aboriginal Corporation for Languages board member and has been involved in the development of various apps that capture and share Aboriginal languages. He brings up the issue of colonialised systems of education that often fail to properly incorporate Aboriginal culture into their curricula, and that this also erodes opportunities for preservation. He said, "Having taught language in schools, I noticed that our children are under threat of losing their Aboriginal English. There's a double-edged sword where we're being denied or prevented from reclaiming our heritage language, but we're also having our Aboriginal language removed from us." In many places, Aboriginal languages are being lost by the privileging of colonial lingua francas. In some cases, such as those found within so-called Australia, this name itself is a colonial overlay. These language groups also denoted pools of localized knowledge that were wide and varied. But as unsurmountable the piecing together of what is un- or partially known seems, based on discussions within the Pass It On event alone, there is an aspect of Aboriginal communication that has and continues to sustain, and that's the idea of the story. Patrick Nunn, in his book The Edge of Memory, credits the preservation of these stories to a narratological system of knowledge that was nurtured and passed on. He writes, "Many Aboriginal people expressly state the imperative of telling a story the correct way. something that not only ensures its content is accurate, but also that the ownership of the story is made explicit. So to summarize Act 2, when language fails, what's left is the story. Storytelling emerges from the complex terrain of language preservation and linguistic forensics as a type of contextual glue. Storytelling is enacted in binding language groups and knowledge pools together. Here forms a vision of stories as databases and as structures for containing and transmitting vital information across the idiosyncrasies of localized language and knowledge. Stories time travel. They harbor longevity. Act 3. Narratology. Narratology is not narration, storytelling, or fiction. Narratology is the study of the structures that support these fields, and the means for analysing and expanding upon literature and literary structures. Narratology has design in it, but rarely attracts attention from designers. Narratology creates design structures. These two diagrams are taken from a project called Narrations that is positioned, according to its instigators, at the intersection between literary studies, information visualization, and interface design. Both diagrams illustrate a piece of text or literature, although it would be impossible to tell this without the extensive documentation that supports this project, and in particular the lengthy design phase, which is discussed in great detail. This Narrations project exemplifies how far narratology has evolved in its embracing of diagramming, and therefore design, as a key or integral part of the field. Narratological diagrams evolved out of the field's formalist roots and has also opened up pathways between various disciplines. So far, narratological structures and techniques have been recognized in the study of ethics, law and legal discourse, as well as the study of gender, film theory, cognition, and various sciences, but not, as far as I know, design until now. Many disciplines have recognized the wealth of diagrammatical vessels that narratology employs, and that can be redeployed as tools for analysis. Templates ready to be emptied out of their literary references and refilled with all manner of subjects for study. Shown here is an example of a narratological structure devised by Perry W. Thorndike based on a simple piece of literature, which has been criticized for rendering this simple story bewilderingly complex in the way it has been mapped out. Kathy Acker has become credited with introducing the diagram to narratological discourse and giving it an injection of postmodernism along the way, with her incorporating of dream maps into her fictional work. In incorporating these dream maps into her fictional work, she took various fractured narratives and melded them together to create new variants and forms. Her dream maps seem messy and unstructured, but they also ushered design to the fore and splintered narratological discourse, creating numerous access points that were not there before. So to summarize Act 3, when language fails, what's left is the story transmogrified into myth. Where narratology and diagramming meet, a clear connection between design and storytelling becomes evident. This connection has been undernourished by a lack of participation from design practitioners. To date, narratology is a realm where design happens with very little input from designers. And yet designers have been moving closer towards the design and build of fictions and mythologies via storytelling through their practices. And narratologists have been moving closer to designing and operating as designers themselves. This emerging overlap could provide the means to identify new ways of capturing and transmitting research. There is also the side benefit of opening up access to a wide range of disciplines from which mutually beneficial connections can be forged. The following is a bit of a segue. One happy outcome from the development of this thesis project has been the identifying of a story-based model for capturing and transmitting design research. And this is what it looks like. This formal-informal structure was envisaged as an innocuous conductive gel. Dropped into this gel are chunks of research which are used to flavor a story. These chunks consist of solid, impermeable, fact-based material. Conductive gel, because it allows for the transmission of factual material as well as creating a form that is able to be kept and archived. A number of stories have been written based on this shared structure and included the following guidance. So each story will be told by a voice within the story. The role of these voices is to act as proxy or agent for the reader. Because of this, character traits would only be described if the embedded research required it. This meant that most characters remained ungendered, unlocated, and without physical description. To similar effect, locations and timeframes were also omitted unless required in order to best stage the embedded research. So what provoked the Made of Stories project? Made of Stories was provoked by witnessing firsthand the vast quantity of design-based research projects or projects with an extensive research quotient attached to them being produced now and over the past few years by designers trying to work out ways to have less material impact on the world. Storytelling was identified as a way to sustain, archive, and further transmit projects beyond the limited durations of research or thesis cycles. The use of the term narrative has become embedded within design language in recent times, and this also needed unpacking. So how was storytelling being used? How is the story a useful vessel for designers in particular? What current concerns within design research did narrative and storytelling address? So many questions arose through researching this project and continue to resonate beyond these initial investigations. Which brings us to what's next. Made of Stories will continue to evolve and reiterate. A printed publication was produced, and this will be updated, and a publishing strategy in order to distribute this text or this publication is currently in development. If you're curious to find out more or to follow developments, information regarding updates and releases will be announced via the ResCat Instagram channel, which you can find at research.catalog on Instagram. You can also visit the Research Catalog website, which is at rescat.site to keep up to date. Ideas within Made of Stories have already been utilized in the creation of imprint-style projects, such as one called Many Rooms, which was exhibited as part of Dutch Design Week in 2020. Information regarding the Many Rooms project can be found on Instagram by visiting many.rooms.project. And again, you can find out information about this on the ResCat website at rescat.site. And that's the end. Thank you for stopping by and making it to this point. If you have any questions, comments, or inquiries, please get in touch. But for now, this is where we end. Thanks again, and I'll see you later. Bye.